Now available in paperback, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Pick up your copy of John Haynes at Death's Door at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. I've been asking myself a critical question. Do writers' skills go into a state of decline over time? Now, the reason why I'm asking this question is because I was thinking about the careers of several writers that I have read in the past, and it seems like over the course of their careers, their writing skills went into a serious state of decline. Now, the first writer that I saw this happen to was the late Richard Wright. Now, the late Richard Wright had built up a career writing stories about black brutes who wound up getting murdered by white men. And his most popular book, Black Boy and Native Son, were considered the peak of his career. But later on, as his career went on into the late 50s, your Richard Wright got panned for a novel called The Outsider, and then eventually his career went into a serious state of decline before he sadly wound up passing away. And another writer that went into this state of decline that I know from reading comic books over the last 30 years was writer Chris Claremont. Now, writer Chris Claremont was known for writing the X-Men at Marvel and was the craftsman who wrote the legendary Phoenix Saga, which was considered to be one of the most legendary and iconic stories in X-Men history. And Chris Claremont stayed with the X-Men from about 1975 to about 1989, and he was writing not only the Uncanny X-Men, but he also wrote spin-off books such as The New Mutants, Excalibur, Wolverine, and even a couple of X-Factor issues, and basically at one time was running the entire X universe up to a certain point. And when I look at Chris Claremont's overall career, he seemed to have peaked with the Phoenix Saga in terms of craftsmanship, and then from there he went into a serious state of creative decline and eventually wound up being fired off the X books in 1990. And your Chris Claremont did try to make a comeback, I think in about 2000. Unfortunately, his skills had deteriorated so badly that his storytelling was panned by audiences who were not really interested in his style of storytelling, with numerous plot threads and lots of meandering character development, that it just seemed like his skills just completely fell right off, and he was never really able to get back to where he was in his prime. Now, another writer that I saw go into a state of decline, in addition to Chris Claremont, was author Terry McMillan. Now, author Terry McMillan, she started out modestly with a book called Mama, and then wrote one of her most iconic works, Disappearing Acts, and then wrote her definitive work, Waiting to Exhale. And after it seems like Waiting to Exhale got popular, your Terry McMillan's skills seemed to go into a state of serious decline once she started to go into Hollywood and started to see her material start to get adapted. And once she started adapting her material into movies, that's when Terry McMillan seemed to have lost her way creatively, because the book she published right after Waiting to Exhale, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, was not very good overall, and it showed that her skills had basically peaked with Waiting to Exhale, and she had gone into a state of creative decline. When in that state of creative decline, her storytelling just fell completely off after Stella, and it became extremely inconsistent. She did have one book, A Day Late and a Dollar Short, that was pretty solid, but ever since then, other books she has done like The Interruption of Everything, and a sequel to Waiting to Exhale called Getting to Happy were critically panned, and your Terry McMillan further on became even more books became of more poor quality, and eventually your Terry McMillan started becoming known for producing poor quality work, and most readers looked to avoid her. Now, another writer that I've seen this happen to also was Brian Michael Bendis, and your Brian Michael Bendis was another comic book writer who was very popular in the early 2000s, and he was known for his run on Ultimate Spider-Man. He was known for his run on many of the Ultimate X-Men, I believe. I don't know if he did that book, but he also did runs on New Avengers and revitalized the Avengers. But then, soon after New Avengers, Brian Michael Bendis' skills just seemed to have gotten lost, and as his skills just seemed to have lost their way, he wasn't the A-list comic writer he used to be back when he was doing the Ultimate Spider-Man comic and creating characters like Jessica Jones. No, Brian Michael Bendis today is what many people consider to be a pale shadow of himself. And when you look at his run on comics like the recent Invincible Iron Man run of 2016, where he introduced Riri Williams, that run is considered to be one of the worst in comic book history, and many people wonder what happened to Brian Michael Bendis' writing skills and what happened in that time that he was away from writing comics. Now, your Brian Michael Bendis' writing skills continued to get worse as he was assigned a run on Superman, and DC editorial thought that they were going to get a spectacular run on Superman with Brian Michael Bendis, and even advertised that Bendis was coming, but sadly, Bendis was not the Bendis of the early 2000s that wrote Ultimate Spider-Man, created Jessica Jones, brought brand new life to the Avengers. No, this was the Brian Michael Bendis who was a pale shadow of himself, and as a pale shadow of himself, your Brian Michael Bendis was writing some of the worst Superman stories and had ruined the character of Jonathan Kent, a fan favorite character, by aging him up and putting him in a meandering soap opera style story that basically destroyed that character's development. Now, when I look at all of these authors, I have to wonder if a writer's skills go into decline, because I look at all of these writers and I look at their work overall, and it seems like they hit a period where they just stop writing very well, and I have to wonder if this could possibly happen to me as a writer, because as a guy who has written over 80 books, I have to wonder, is there a point where my skills would fall completely off? Now, this is something I have been working tirelessly to try to avoid, and I've been trying to work to avoid it because one of the things I know about being a writer is you have to continue maintaining your craft, and you have to continue maintaining your craft as a storyteller, and you need to do that because you want to make sure that every story you produce, from the first book you publish to the last, is of some level of quality, because yes, you may start out in the beginning like I did with the first ISIS and not know what you're doing, but eventually once you learn how things work with storytelling, there comes a point where you want to be able to continue not only maintaining your skill level, but always working to improve it. And that's something I try to do every day by going out here and reading different books like I have with Sid Field's screenplay and Robert McKee's story, and constantly reading about different types of character transformation arcs, different story paradigms, reading about character transformation arcs, overreaching arcs. I mean, I want to make sure that my craft is solid, and I want to make sure that I can go out here and give readers quality stories every time I go out here and publish a book. on the SJS Direct imprint. And that's one of the reasons why I'm always not only reading about the craft of storytelling, but I'm also reading about different genres of fiction and learning how to work in different genres of fiction. I'm always looking to learn how to write better stories and looking to improve my craft as a writer with each passing story. I don't want to get to the point where I either peak and start going into a state of decline skill-wise or get too comfortable writing a story, because one of the big mistakes I see with a lot of writers, like I saw with Chris Claremont, was that he got way too comfortable writing the X-Men, and that's why the X-Men over the 80s became filled with a lot of convoluted plot threads and meandering storylines. Yes, there were a lot of good storylines here and there, but a lot of the plot threads really just were not really organic like they were during the Phoenix Saga, and things got really contrived because he got too comfortable. And that's one of the mistakes that can lead to a writer going into decline, is that they get too comfortable with characters, and instead of looking to try to further help these characters actualize their potential, what they do is start coasting with these characters instead of trying to see these characters grow to become better and be the best that they can be and give readers an entertaining story overall. Now, another mistake I saw with Terry McMillan was that she went out here and went Hollywood, and as she went Hollywood, the things went to her head, and instead of focusing on improving her craft as a screenwriter and developing and learning different techniques for storytelling, I saw Terry McMillan go out here, write Waiting to Exhale, then write Stella, which was really an uneven book, and her skills fell completely off. And then as Going Hollywood went to her head, the quality of her books went into a state of serious decline, and now her books aren't really relatable to the original black audience that she was reaching out to, and Terry McMillan is a pale shadow of the writer that she was. And when I look at your Brian Michael Bendis, again, I see another state of what happens when a writer becomes too comfortable and they let their skills atrophy. And that's another thing that I try to avoid myself, is letting your skills atrophy, because when you let your skills atrophy, what happens is that you're not really as meticulous as related to your craft. You start getting into emotional writing like he did with Riri Williams and getting emotionally attached to characters instead of remaining objective and focusing on making sure that this character is the best they can be. And that was one of the things that I saw him do that led to the complete mess that John Kent became. He wanted to go out here and do a Days of Our Lives age up on John Kent, not understanding what made John Kent popular was that readers wanted to grow up and see Clark's son grow into a Superman. And because he didn't really understand the character, he wound up derailing the Superman books that Dan Jurgens and Peter Tomasi had meticulously put together and basically revitalized and brought brand new life to the Superman books. And that's all because you had a writer who, yes, he was popular and he could get a lot of pieces written on him as related to these clickbait articles, but his skills had fallen off so badly, and that was preventing him from being able to tell compelling stories that would allow him to generate sales. And that's something that your Brian Michael Bendis led to his state of decline. And again, writers, it's one of those things that I think about all the time, about when a writer, is there a time when a writer's skills just start falling off? Or are writers not being vigilant about their skills? Do they just get caught up in their hype? That is something that I think about all the time as related to my own skills, because one of the things that I want to do, because I understand that writing is a craft, is I want to keep my craft on point, and I'm always trying to challenge myself with different kinds of stories. I don't want to get to the point where I'm writing the same story over and over again. And I had a family member asking me, do you want to create another black male character? And yeah, I want to create another black male character, but I want to make sure that it's not a John Haynes knockoff. I mean, I did this with John Williams and Spray 'em Up, but what I want to do, again, when I create a new black male character, I want them to have their own personality, I want them to have their own voice, and I want them to have their own story, the same way that Matilda Crowley had her own story, and I created a whole new story model and story platform so that that character's personality and voice could be different from other women that I wrote, like Isis or Eastine or Cassandra Lee from the Recipe for Success, or Colleen from the Thetas. And when I was writing Lilith Graves in Eternal Night, which was my first horror novel, I wanted Lilith's voice and I wanted her story model to be different. And every time I approach a story, I want to make sure every story is unique, every story is different, every story, has its own spirit, its own voice, and its own heart. And as I'm doing this, I want to make sure that the readers get the best quality story. And that's one of the things I try to do, because I always want to try to keep my skills sharp. That's one of the things I'm always, very, very diligent about, is studying storytelling, story models and approaches to storytelling, because I've seen writers go from being at the top of their craft to falling into an abyss as related to their storytelling. And the thing is that I wonder, is there a point where a writer reaches their peak? Is there a point where a writer's skills start to soften? Because I was on Facebook one day and I was listening to one of my Facebook friends. They were talking about how bad Stephen King had become. And it's one of those things that I think about all the time, because when you're a writer, you're always working on stories, but you want to make sure that your stories remain solid, that your skills remain sharp, and you're always trying to improve and trying to learn different techniques. I kind of see writing the same way that certain chefs out here see cooking. I mean, a chef, when he goes to different restaurants when he's early in his career, and he'll work the line all the way from dishwasher and work his way up to head chef. I mean, he'll work and learn every dish on that menu as part of his craft, so he can learn the basics about either French cooking, Indian cooking, Chinese cooking, American cooking. He'll work in a restaurant because he wants to learn how the food is put together, and he wants to learn the entire line. And by working each station in the line, he can master the entire menu and learn all of the techniques for cooking the food. And I use those same kind of approach to writing. I wanted to learn the whole aspects of the novel. I wanted to learn the aspects of the screenplay. I wanted to learn the aspects and techniques of comic book writing, and I wanted to learn how to do nonfiction. I mean, I worked the line all the way from the short story to the novelette, to the novel, to the screenplay, to the comic book. I mean, I worked the entire line, learning all of the different skills. And again, I wanted to learn that so I could learn how to master the craft of writing. And that's something that I wanted to learn from like the back of my hand. And again, I wonder, is there a point where a writer's skills start to decline, or can a writer stay consistent in their craft, and can they continue to stay consistent over the course of their career, even up until they stop and decide to finally write their last work? Now, if you want to see me make more videos about writing, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my fiction on the SJS Direct Imprint and my nonfiction, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find those books on Smashwords, the iBookstore, Barnes & Noble, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today.